If you can't say it clearly, you don't understand it yourself. Wow, that is a seriously powerful quote by John Searle, and I just want you to let it sink in for a second. Think about it. How often do we feel like we understand a concept perfectly, only to completely stumble over our words the second someone asks us to explain it? Well, let's dive into this, because today we're going to challenge the very assumptions we hold about our own understanding. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're digging deep into Nigel Warburton's fantastic book, Thinking from A to Z, specifically looking at the translation to Farsi by Mohammad Mehdi Khosrowani, which serves as a brilliant guide to critical thinking. We're going to use this source material to build up a mental toolkit. Think of it like constructing a mental fortress to help you navigate what is an incredibly chaotic and noisy world, a world where bad arguments and fuzzy logic are literally everywhere. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The art of critical thinking. 2. Mental defense, traps and fallacies. 3. Constructive tools for clear thinking. 4. Assertion versus argument. And 5. Why critical thinking matters. Let's get moving.
Section 1. The art of critical thinking. Building your mental toolkit. You know, critical thinking isn't just some dry academic exercise meant only for philosophy classrooms. As the source material really highlights, it's a highly active, daily practice. It's a skill, and it's a habit that requires constant, deliberate effort on our part. The translator's preface actually brilliantly divides our thinking toolkit into two distinct categories. On the negative or defensive side, we have tools that are absolutely essential for spotting logical fallacies, seeing through rhetoric, and defending our minds against manipulation. Then, on the positive, constructive side, we have the strategies we use to actively solve problems, clarify our own ideas, and build really sound, robust arguments. To thrive, we need both.
Section 2. Mental defense, traps and fallacies. Shielding your mind. First up in our defensive toolkit, spotting the strawman. So, a strawman fallacy happens when someone takes a complex or highly nuanced argument from their opponent, twists it into a ridiculous, exaggerated caricature, and then attacks that fake version instead of the real one. It's a calculated trick. It's completely designed to make the person using it look like they've won a debate, when in reality, they haven't addressed the actual issue at all. Let's see how this actually works in practice. The book gives this really great example of a debate about zoos. Imagine someone argues that zoos can play a vital role in protecting endangered species. Then their opponent distorts this by saying, "Oh, so you think only endangered species should be kept in zoos and we should just release all the rest?" Right? That's a classic straw man. The text also mentions Dr. Samuel Johnson, who famously kicked a massive stone to supposedly refute Bishop Berkeley's complex philosophical idealism. Again, it's an unfair, oversimplified mockery. It is definitely not a real rebuttal.
Our next trap is one I think we're literally all guilty of, and that's wishful thinking. This is believing something is true simply because you deeply, deeply desire it to be true. It acts as a massive psychological barrier for us. It shields us from harsh, uncomfortable realities, but the trade-off is that it drastically distorts our reasoning.
The crucial thing to remember here is that wishful thinking isn't just harmless optimism. It can actually be incredibly dangerous. The source text gives a striking example of this. A man drinks 10 pints of beer. He then completely convinces himself that the alcohol hasn't affected his driving abilities whatsoever. Why? Well, because it's just much easier and way more convenient for him to drive home than to call a taxi. His intense desire for convenience literally overrides his perception of reality, and that leads to a potentially fatal decision. Closely related to wishful thinking is sentimentality. The text defines this as an inappropriate or excessive emotional response used as an avoidance strategy. So when a person is being sentimental in this context, they're retreating into a comforting, highly fictionalized worldview, mostly because the real world is just way too unpleasant for them to deal with. Let's look at a specific anecdote from the text that really brings this to life. Imagine a mother who completely refuses to believe her child is a bully. She sees her kid as this pure, innocent angel, aggressively ignoring the very real bruises and trauma inflicted on the other children. See, this isn't just love. This is sentimentality acting as a blindfold against a harsh, ugly truth about her own child. Okay, let's clear up a super common confusion right now: vagueness versus ambiguity. Vagueness is simply a lack of precision. Ambiguity, on the other hand, is when a word or phrase has multiple, distinct meanings. Interestingly, politicians absolutely love to exploit vagueness. They'll get up and promise increased efficiency or better days ahead.
I mean, it sounds great, but it completely lacks any precise metrics. It's a deliberate tactic they use to avoid making concrete commitments that they can actually be held to later.
Section 3. Constructive tools for clear thinking. Building better ideas. Shifting gears a bit, one of the most powerful tools in our constructive arsenal is the thought experiment. This is an imaginary, often highly artificial scenario designed to isolate and clarify a very specific concept. It's a brilliant way to test our deepest intuitions without needing, physical laboratories or complex tools. We get to use our imagination to pressure test our own logic. The book highlights philosopher Robert Nozick's extremely famous experience machine. Imagine a machine that could perfectly simulate a reality where you experience ultimate, unending pleasure and success, but none of it is actually real. You'd just be floating in a tank somewhere. So, would you plug into it for the rest of your life? Most people say no, and this brilliantly illustrates the point. By saying no to the machine, the thought experiment proves that we fundamentally value things like authenticity, truth, and real connection way more than just endless simulated pleasure.
Section 4. Assertion versus argument. Structuring your logic.
So it's one thing to have a clear thought, but it's an entirely different thing to communicate it effectively. We really need to master the vital difference between just claiming something is true and actually proving it. An assertion is simply stating a belief without any evidence. For example, just saying, God does not exist, or this book is great. An argument in the strictly logical sense is totally different. An argument provides a claim that is firmly backed by premises, reasons, and evidence that other people can actively evaluate and test for themselves. Let's actually break down an argument to look at its hidden machinery. The text uses the example of someone saying, "Don't let your kid watch A Clockwork Orange, it's violent." That sounds pretty simple, right? But a full logical argument has underlying, sometimes totally unsaid premises. Let's look at them. 1. Violent films make kids violent. 2. You shouldn't let kids do violent things. 3. You have the power to stop them. 4. A Clockwork Orange is violent. Therefore, the conclusion, stop them from watching it. Explicitly exposing these steps is exactly how critical thinking works in real time.
Another really common constructive tool for building arguments is the argument from analogy. This is when we compare two things that share known similarities, and we use that connection to infer they share other, unseen similarities. It is incredibly common in everyday life, but as the text heavily warns, it can be pretty risky if the similarities aren't actually relevant to the conclusion you're trying to draw.
The outline's one of the most famous arguments from analogy in modern philosophy, coming from Judith Jarvis Thomson. She asks you to imagine waking up surgically attached to a famous violinist who needs your kidneys to survive for 9 months. If you unplug, he dies. Thomson uses this deeply provocative analogy to isolate the variable of bodily autonomy in the complex moral debate surrounding abortion, essentially arguing that the right to life does not automatically grant the right to use someone else's body. Now, whether you agree with the ultimate conclusion or not, it perfectly shows how an analogy forces us to evaluate our core premises in a completely new light. Section 5. Why critical thinking matters. Applying the toolkit. All right, so we've built the fortress, we have the defensive shield, and the constructive sword. But why does this mental framework actually matter when you walk away from this explainer today? The absolute most crucial point is this. Employing this toolkit doesn't mean becoming a miserable cynic. It's not about being an obnoxious nitpicker who just yells fallacy at every casual conversation. True critical thinking, as outlined in our source, is really about applying the principle of charity. It's about evaluating evidence fairly, giving people the benefit of the doubt, seeking genuine clarity, and ultimately living a reasoned, intentional life rather than just being swept along by manipulation. I'm going to leave you with a challenge today. I want you to take this mental toolkit, your brand new ability to spot straw men, wishful thinking, and mere assertions, out into the real world. As you scroll through the news or browse social media today, can you spot just one unsupported assertion or an intentionally vague political statement? I guarantee you'll find one. Because once you start seeing the matrix of arguments all around you, you literally can never unsee it. Keep your mental fortress strong and keep thinking clearly.